Professor Das. That was very, very useful. Now I would request Professor Ashima Goyal, Professor IGIDR, to share some few thoughts about macroeconomics impact of mobile-based financial inclusion. Can we have Professor Ashima Goyal, please?
Thank you. It's an excellent idea to get together regulators, mobile companies, banks to discuss this issue, because I think solving financial services in India requires cooperation among these three, and also to derive some action points. So I'm sure this forum will come out with some such. And we started by saying we are celebrating or talking about the importance of ideas. So I want to, how do we think about inclusion, and therefore why are mobile banking services so important? Inclusion means you're concerned with equality. So innovations, high-tech innovations generally, there's a perception that they increase inequality. So how can they, one of the topics I will touch on is how can they really be inclusive? So in order to do this, you want to define inclusive innovation as something that creates productivity improving products that can be accessed by all. There's no exclusion there. Moreover, in the Indian context, I think it's important to talk about active inclusion, which creates conditions for the many to contribute to and participate in growth. So this is really suited to both new technologies and to Indian catch-up growth and the predominance of young in India, of youth in India. Because we are used to think of poverty alleviation in terms of transfers, in terms of doles, in terms of providing help to people who are in persistent poverty. But we need to switch. And therefore, I think the concept of active inclusion is important. New technologies make major contributions to both growth and inclusion, but these are still far below potential. And this is very puzzling, since we are a country of the young, and the young just love technology, and the rest of us struggle with it a little bit. So the argument is going to be that our policies are not fine-tuned to increasing market size, which in turn can increase inclusive innovation. For new technologies, there are some kind of catchwords associated, one of which is that the winner takes all. The other is digital divide. We are familiar with the really large inequality in advanced economies, which is technology-driven, because those who have skills manage to, it's like the one who gets everything. But during the period when these new technologies have spread, although inequalities have been rising within countries, particularly in countries like the US and UK and so on, but they have been falling globally since there was much faster emerging and developing market growth in countries like China, India, where a large number of which have very large populations. Moreover, mobile technology is naturally inclusive since it's not capital intensive. In fact, mobile telephony has been one of the success stories in India, where connections have increased from 37 million in 01 to above 900 million in recent periods. And there are users among all income classes, so it is inclusive. But at the same time, mobile-enabled services have been lagging. And for this meeting here, where we want to focus on financial inclusion, the spread of mobile banking is especially important, and has not really happened as much as we hoped or we thought or expected it would, especially since the focus was on inclusive banking, giving everyone a bank account. Only 50% of Indians have a bank account, have access to financial services. So to come to the ideas and concepts to sort of pare down from the huge kind of potential factors one should consider, I want to think in terms of a metaphor where there are three ICT new technology techniques, and the output you produce can be a convex combination of these. One of the techniques is highly capital and skill intensive, the second is intermediate, and the last is low skill. A poor country is typically caught in using low-skill techniques, uneducated people with low skills. So example would be using a tractor or a plow or a spade in agriculture. Then you have two kinds of labor or skills, high quality, H, and O, ordinary. Two consumer types, those who are well off, W, and those who are less well off, L. And they face the same production isoquant, but different budget lines. The less well off have less capital, so they can afford only the less advanced technique. And these production isoquant shifts with technological change. So if this is your production frontier, and then normally induced technical change is capital biased. That is that you require less inputs to, if you're going to work with the A technique, the capital intensive technique becomes more efficient. And given the budget lines, that means that these less well off, who are stuck at the lower end, can't afford, don't benefit from this technological improvement. While if you have intermediate technology biased capital change, that means this B, the intermediate technology, is becoming more efficient, it's using less inputs, and that means that the poor, the less well off now can get a better deal, can get more for less, and their welfare improves. So this is the definition of inclusion. And the interesting thing is that if the increase in productivity in intermediate technologies is so high, then even the more well-off want to use this, it pays for them to use it. And so the market size for this kind of technique really rises. And that induces more technical change in a virtuous cycle. So the policy insights would be, if you want to encourage inclusive innovation, you need to could either invest in the intermediate technology, either directly or just give people money to do this and so on, or you could make it more accessible to L, the less well-off. The alternative is you act on their budget lines. And this could be, again, in two ways, either through income transfers, which is what we have traditionally been doing, or through strategies that favor what I defined as active inclusion. And this could be either reducing transaction costs for these people, which also saves inputs, times, makes up, because the poor have their time is precious. A maid of mine used to say, I don't go to the ration to get ration rice because there are too many stones in it. I don't have the time to we think of it as targeting that the poor, you can give them something less efficient. So either reduce their transaction costs or improve infrastructure, which also saves costs, because the poor are more dependent on public infrastructure. They can't kind of find ways out of poor services. So better infrastructure, better public services. Then the market size rises. And I have a paper which is on my website, which is a more formal model, which derives conditions under which market size induces more innovation in techniques such as B, intermediate techniques. And we derive a formal threshold, which is determined by the relative prices of goods using these techniques, of their productivity, and of the size of the inputs. Below this threshold, innovation tends to be high skill and capital intensive. That is, does not favor inclusion, but it favors intermediate technologies after the threshold. And so policy that increases market size would then increase this kind of innovation and trigger inclusive innovation. So now we come to Indian technology policy. And it's really surprising that given a lot of our growth was driven by exports based on technology services, still our technology infrastructure is really backward compared to most countries. Rural teledensity continues to be below 50%. Even in cities, only 10% of the population can access the internet. In Mumbai, in 2013, the quality was worse than in an average US city, the internet speed and so on, but 6 times more expensive. So it's strange how policymakers have neglected this basic infrastructure. India's technology, and we have repeated policy statements, but they tend to neglect, as Dr. Das was telling us, they neglect the demand side, which can draw in, which can induce innovations, while they focus more on the transfer kind of way of looking at things, or just financing research. Similarly, the new telecom policy has some good initiatives, talks of using convergence, improving incentive structures, which would induce better market outcomes. But implementation remains poor. So there is a great, so this is the point that I was trying to make, that we have not achieved our potential in this area, and what are the reasons. Other countries have done better. So these are some figures which show the rural, how rural, there's lag, and even urban, although there's an increase in the wireless subscribers. So the market size in that sense has really increased. Now when you come to mobile banking itself, there are concerns that the regulator has, which are that you prefer bank-linked business correspondent model. So that can offer more, there are valid reasons for this. It can offer more financial services, and security issues such as and know your customer, then anti-money laundering when you're concerned with improper use of funds across nations. And they're also unwilling to allow deposit holding by non-banks because of possible fraud and for poorer people. And they have shown some flexibility in adjusting regulations and limits in response to feedback. But if we compare India and Pakistan, who are neighboring countries, and both started mobile banking or regulations with this in 2008, but with a much smaller population, the number of mobile transactions has grown and more than double in Pakistan. So, in terms of identifying action points, just looking at this can perhaps help us pick up some action points. So this table just shows that India sort of leads Pakistan in most infrastructure issues, and yet we are behind in terms of mobile banking transactions. Pakistan had what they call branchless bank accounts, and the interesting thing was, like our less well-off and the difference in population, there were 3 levels designed for these different levels of consumers, separate for business, for low-level consumers, and so on. And moreover, these branchless banks were not restricted to few categories. I've always wondered why we didn't use our post offices, which are widespread in rural areas. So Pakistan Post and chain stores were allowed to open bank branches, branchless bank accounts, and a larger number of activities, including person-to-person fund transfers, cash in, cash out, loans, remittances are a major issue for where you have a large migrant poor population. So these bill payments and person-to-person transactions account for about 80% of mobile transactions in Pakistan. But to fine-tune what were the differences, both had many similarities. Both were bank-linked models. We often hear this, that mobile wallets will only work if telcos are allowed to provide them, not linked to banks. But Pakistan also was bank-linked. No monetary value stored in mobiles. Banks responsible for security and stability and data records. And each transaction had to be through a customer account. But the key differences were that Pakistan, more flexibilities in function, more customization to customer needs, higher initial levels and limits, more income categories, wider business correspondent universe, and then making it easier for people to use this. Earlier, mandatory physical presence was required for customer registration, but this was relaxed. And so there was more innovation in conveniences offered to customers, which brought in both the well-off and the less well-off types, increased market size in terms of our model, in terms of our concepts, and led to more creative services being developed, leading to a virtuous cycle of cumulative innovation and use. So India has a large population and a large population of mobile users, so the potential market size is there. But our technology policies have not leveraged this enough. And moreover, poor public services in general have reduced budget sets for the less well-off, leading to inclusion. But this idea of allowing market size to rise induces innovation, and it overcomes some of our limitations of relying too much on public sector where there are inefficiencies. Since it's decentralized, it's less subject to policy errors. Technology alone is inadequate. You need better systems, delivery, governance, and you need the government also to perform. Everything can't be done by the private sector. And ICT has the advantage that e-delivery can improve public services, also increase transparency, reduce discretion. So technology infrastructure favors active inclusion, to conclude. And the new developments such as UID, which will reduce KYC issues, increase ease for customers, cloud, which will reduce costs, and so on, smartphones, which will allow greater power in the average hands. The time is ripe for a focused push on increasing market size and therefore further innovation.